For decades, the American Mafia thrived in secrecy. Its codes were unwritten, its hierarchy was rigid, and those who entered the world of organized crime rarely escaped it alive. Yet one man managed to do something almost unthinkable. His name was Henry Hill, a streetwise kid from Brooklyn, New York, who grew up idolizing the gangsters that ruled his neighborhood. As a teenager, he watched them drive expensive cars, wear sharp suits, and command respect wherever they went. To him, they represented power, freedom, and a life far beyond the limits of ordinary people. Before long, Hill was drawn into their world, working for members of the powerful Lucchese crime family and building close relationships with dangerous figures like Jimmy Burke and Thomas DeSimone. For years, he lived exactly the life he had dreamed about: money, crime, and influence blowing through the streets around John F. Kennedy International Airport. But the deeper Hill went into the Mafia, the more dangerous the world became. What began as admiration slowly turned into paranoia, violence, and betrayal. Eventually, the man who once swore loyalty to the mob would do the one thing the Mafia feared most. He would tell the truth about everything. The early life of Henry Hill began in Brooklyn, New York, where organized crime was not something distant or mysterious. It was part of everyday life. Born in 1943, Hill grew up in a working-class neighborhood where Mafia figures moved through the streets with an air of confidence and authority that fascinated many young boys. Expensive cars lined the sidewalks outside social clubs. Men in tailored suits conducted quiet meetings behind closed doors, and envelopes of cash regularly changed hands without attracting much attention. For Hill, this environment created a powerful impression. While other kids imagined becoming athletes or businessmen, he became obsessed with the idea of becoming a gangster. The men connected to the Lucchese crime family seemed to live without the limits that controlled ordinary people. They had money, respect, and the ability to bend rules without consequences. As a teenager, Hill began spending time around a local cab stand that served as an informal headquarters for Mafia operations run by Paul Vario, a powerful capo who controlled much of the neighborhood's criminal activity. Hill started with small tasks, running errands, delivering messages, and helping move stolen goods. But these jobs quickly pulled him deeper into the criminal world. The more reliable he proved himself to be, the more trust he gained from older mob associates. Through this environment, he met figures who would shape his life in dangerous ways, including the feared enforcer Jimmy Burke and the volatile young gangster Thomas DeSimone. Together, they formed part of a crew that would eventually control profitable criminal operations around John F. Kennedy International Airport, where cargo theft and smuggling created millions of dollars in illegal revenue. For Hill, this was more than just a criminal apprenticeship. It was the beginning of a life that seemed glamorous from the outside, but would later reveal a far darker reality. As Henry Hill entered adulthood in the 1960s, his role inside the criminal world surrounding the Lucchese crime family expanded rapidly. What had started as small errands for local mobsters soon evolved into participation in serious criminal operations. Hill became deeply involved with the crew led by Paul Vario, where experienced gangsters taught him how organized crime actually functioned behind the scenes. The group's activities revolved around a variety of profitable schemes that ranged from cargo theft to gambling and loan sharking. One of the most important locations for their operations was John F. Kennedy International Airport, where millions of dollars in goods moved through cargo terminals every day. For Hill and the crew around him, the airport represented a constant opportunity. Trucks carrying electronics, clothing, liquor, and valuable imports were frequently targeted in carefully organized hijackings that could generate enormous profits within minutes. During this period, Hill developed close relationships with two men who would become central figures in his criminal life. The first was Jimmy Burke, a ruthless and intelligent gangster who had a reputation for planning large-scale robberies with precision. The second was Thomas DeSimone, a younger associate known for his explosive temper and willingness to use violence when necessary. Together, the three men formed a dangerous partnership that carried out a series of robberies and illegal operations across New York City. Hill was not the most violent member of the crew, but he played an important role in organizing jobs, moving stolen goods, and maintaining connections that helped the group expand its operations. As the money flowed in, Hill began living the lifestyle he had once admired as a teenager. Expensive clothes, nights spent in bars and restaurants, and a reputation that commanded respect in the neighborhood. Yet beneath the excitement of this lifestyle was a growing reality that Hill would eventually have to confront. The world he had entered was built on loyalty enforced by fear, and once someone was deeply involved in mafia operations, leaving that life was almost impossible. The turning point in the life of Henry Hill came during the late 1970s, when the criminal operations surrounding his crew reached their most ambitious and dangerous level. By this time, Hill was deeply embedded in the network of associates connected to the Lucchese crime family, working alongside figures like Jimmy Burke and Thomas DeSimone. The group had already made enormous profits through cargo theft and smuggling around John F. Kennedy International Airport, but in 1978 they became connected to one of the most famous robberies in American criminal history, the Lufthansa Heist. On a cold night in December 1978, a team linked to Burke stormed the Lufthansa cargo terminal at JFK Airport, escaping with roughly $6 million in cash and jewelry, an amount equivalent to more than $25 million today. At the time, it was the largest cash robbery ever carried out on American soil. For Hill, the robbery represented both the peak of his criminal career and the beginning of a terrifying new phase. Enormous sums of money were suddenly circulating among members of the crew, but that wealth also attracted intense attention from law enforcement. Even more dangerous was the paranoia spreading inside the criminal group itself. As investigators began searching for suspects connected to the robbery, several individuals linked to the operation mysteriously disappeared or were found dead. According to later testimony, some of these killings were ordered by Jimmy Burke, who feared that loose talk or careless spending might expose the entire operation to federal investigators. Hill began realizing that the glamorous criminal life he had admired for years was now surrounded by constant danger. People he had worked with were vanishing, rumors of betrayal were spreading, and the pressure from authorities was increasing. What had once felt like an exciting world of power and money was starting to look like a trap that could end in prison or death. For the first time since he had entered the mafia as a teenager, Hill began questioning whether loyalty to the mob was worth the price he might soon have to pay. By the end of the 1970s, the life that Henry Hill had once admired began collapsing around him. The profits from robberies and smuggling had created a glamorous image of the mafia, but behind that image, the pressure from law enforcement was growing rapidly. Federal investigators and local police were tightening their investigations into criminal operations connected to the Lucchese crime family, particularly after the massive Lufthansa heist drew national attention. For Hill, the situation became even more dangerous because he had begun operating outside the traditional rules of the mafia. Unlike many members of the organization, Hill became deeply involved in drug trafficking, which was strictly forbidden by many mafia bosses because it attracted aggressive federal investigations. In 1980, Hill's criminal world finally collided with law enforcement when he was arrested for narcotics trafficking. Facing the possibility of a long prison sentence, and increasingly aware that the mob might view him as a liability, Hill realized that his life was in serious danger from two directions. If he went to prison, he could spend decades behind bars. If he remained loyal to the Mafia, there was a strong possibility that he might eventually be killed to prevent him from cooperating with authorities. In that moment, Hill made a decision that few people inside organized crime had ever dared to make. Instead of remaining silent, he agreed to cooperate with the Federal Bureau of Investigation and federal prosecutors. The information he provided revealed detailed insights into the inner workings of mafia operations that had remained hidden for decades. Hill described robberies, smuggling networks, and the violent enforcement methods used by members of the Lucchese organization. His testimony played a major role in building cases against several criminals connected to the crew that had once dominated operations around John F. Kennedy International Airport. For the Mafia, Hill's decision represented the ultimate betrayal. The man who had spent most of his life inside their world was now helping federal investigators dismantle it piece by piece. From that moment forward, Henry Hill could never return to the life he once knew, because becoming a government witness meant leaving the Mafia world forever. The price of survival would now be anonymity, relocation, and a completely new identity. Conditions that would shape the rest of his life in ways he could never have imagined when he first admired the gangsters of Brooklyn as a young boy. After agreeing to cooperate with the Federal Bureau of Investigation, the life of Henry Hill changed in ways that few former gangsters had ever experienced. By the early 1980s, Hill had provided investigators with detailed testimony about the inner workings of the crew connected to the Lucchese crime family, exposing robberies, smuggling operations, and the violent methods used to maintain control in New York's criminal underworld. His information helped prosecutors build cases against several Mafia associates, including individuals connected to the operations of Paul Vario and Jimmy Burke. For the government, Hill became one of the most valuable witnesses they had ever obtained from inside a Mafia crew. For the mob, however, he became something else entirely, a traitor who had violated the strict code of silence that organized crime depended on. Because of this danger, Hill and his family were placed into the Witness Protection Program, a system designed to relocate informants and give them new identities so they could avoid retaliation from the criminals they testified against. This program forced Hill to leave behind the world he had known for most of his life. The bars, restaurants, and social clubs of Brooklyn and Queens where he once felt powerful were replaced with anonymous neighborhoods where nobody knew his past. Yet adjusting to this new life proved difficult. Hill had spent decades surrounded by the excitement and risk of organized crime, and the routine of ordinary life often felt restrictive and unfamiliar. Over the years, he struggled with legal troubles, substance abuse, and the psychological impact of abandoning the identity that had defined him since he was a teenager. Despite these struggles, Hill's story continued to attract attention because it provided one of the most detailed insider accounts of Mafia life ever recorded. Journalist Nicholas Pileggi used Hill's experiences as the basis for the non-fiction book Wiseguy, which later inspired the legendary crime film Goodfellas, directed by Martin Scorsese. Through the performance of Ray Liotta, audiences around the world were introduced to the story of a man who had lived inside the Mafia and then helped expose it. What began as the dream of a young boy fascinated by gangsters had ultimately turned into one of the most revealing portraits of organized crime ever brought to the screen. The story of Henry Hill ultimately reveals something far more complex than the glamorous image of organized crime often portrayed in movies. For years, Hill lived inside a world controlled by the Lucchese crime family, surrounded by money, influence, and the illusion of loyalty. To outsiders, that life looked powerful and untouchable. But behind the expensive suits, crowded restaurants, and late-night celebrations existed a constant atmosphere of fear, betrayal, and violence. The same system that rewarded loyalty also destroyed anyone who became a liability. When Hill decided to cooperate with the Federal Bureau of Investigation, he didn't just betray the Mafia's code of silence. He exposed how fragile that world truly was. The testimony he provided helped investigators dismantle parts of a criminal network that had operated in the shadows for decades. At the same time, his decision forced him into a life where anonymity replaced notoriety and survival replaced power. The man who once moved freely through New York's underworld would spend the rest of his life looking over his shoulder, knowing that the past could never fully disappear. Ironically, the very life he left behind would become immortalized in popular culture through Wiseguy and the film Goodfellas. Millions of viewers around the world would watch the rise and fall of a gangster lifestyle that Hill himself had once believed would last forever. Yet his real story serves as a reminder that the Mafia's glamour was always an illusion built on instability and danger. In the end, Henry Hill's life was not just the story of a gangster. It was the story of a man who entered organized crime chasing power and excitement, only to discover that the same world could erase everything he once believed in.